이 영상은 2016년 노벨경제학상을 수상하신 올리브 하트 교수님과 상명대학교 오철 교수님의 인터뷰 영상입니다. 사실 한국경제신문 기사에 이미 올라간 영상인데 저희들이 편집을 했기 때문에 자유롭게 쓸 수 있습니다. 약 25분가량 되는 영상으로 원어민이 실제 대화에서 쓰는 언어적 습관, 톤, 제스처, 뉘앙스 등등 다양한 것들을 느끼실 수 있을 것 같아서 저희들이 이 영상을 가지고 함께 공부하는 영상으로 만들어 보고자 합니다. 이재준 대표와 제가 여기 나오는 유용한 표현, 문법, 언어적 습관 등등을 약 10여 편 정도로 나눠서 제작할 예정입니다. 우리가 이미 배웠던 것은 한번 적용해보고 앞으로 배울 것들을 언급드릴 예정입니다. 미리 한번 프리뷰 하신다는 생각으로 끝까지 한번 보시면 도움이 되실 거라고 생각합니다.
I noticed there are two main keywords in your book: incomplete contract and control. Could you explain those two keywords to our Korean audience in a simple way?
지금부터 20여 분간 영어로 된 인터뷰 영상이 나갈 겁니다. 처음부터 편안하게 한번 끝까지 들어보시기 바랍니다. 앞으로 진행될 10여 편 영상 이후에도 다시 한번 봐주시면 처음 볼 때와 이 차이점을 분명히 느끼실 수 있을 겁니다.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's very nice of you to come all this way to speak to me. So incomplete contracts and control, those are sort of basic elements of my work. So incomplete contracts, that just refers to the fact that many contracts that people write, either individuals or firms with each other, will not specify everything that's meant to happen. It's just too difficult to do it, particularly in an economic relationship which extends over time, because when we are getting into some economic relationship which is going to last for perhaps many years, in principle we would like to know what we should be doing with each other,
yes.
you know, which might be you're supplying me with something and I'm going to pay you something for it, but we might be talking about something 5-10 years from now. Okay? In an ideal world, we would anticipate what my needs will be and your costs will be 10 years from now, and so we could write into the contract exactly how much you will be supplying me and exactly what it should be and how much I should pay you. That would be a sort of complete contract, but in reality it's too hard to think ahead, and so the contract we write will not specify everything which matters in our relationship. So that's one, and by the way, even simple transactions, if you enter into a contract, if you really think about it, there's probably some ambiguity there,
Yes.
because it's just hard to, when we use words in a contract, and words are not that precise.
Yes.
So contracts people write will have things missing and will also be ambiguous, and that's what
Yes.
Incomplete contracts means. Now the second part, control.
Yes.
Okay. Given that the contract that people write with each other will be incomplete, a critical question from an economic point of view is who gets to decide on the things that are left out of the contract. So as we move forward in our relationship, let's say 5 years have passed, and now we want something to happen, and we look at the contract to see what the contract says should happen, and the contract is not completely specific about it, then somebody has to decide what happens.
Yes.
And I call this, and my co-authors and I call this residual control rights or residual decision rights. Who has them? So if the contract was complete, it wouldn't matter,
Yes.
because control wouldn't be important since there's nothing left out of the contract. But when the contract leaves things out, then the person who has the right to decide on the missing things, that becomes important, that right, and who has that right, and I call that residual control
Control,
rights. And
yes.
so that's the control part of it. And I mean, just to give an example, because in my work I've argued that residual control rights often go together with ownership
Yes.
of an asset. So to take an example, think of your house. You live in a house. You might rent the house or you might own the house. If you own the house and you decide, you know, you'd like to have a different paint color on the walls, you'd like to paint the walls brown instead of white.
Because of ownership, right?
Hmm?
Yeah. Because of ownership.
Well, I'm saying
Yeah.
that's what you want to do.
Yes.
You're bored with the old paint color and you'd like to repaint. Okay? As the owner, you have the right to do that.
Yes.
If you rent, though, you don't have the right to do
Different
that.
story.
You would have to get the landlord's or landlady's permission. That's an example of a residual control right. Your rental contract will typically not specify anything about painting or repainting. So that then, because the contract is incomplete on that dimension, we then ask, well, who has the right to decide on the paint color? Well, it's a residual right because it's not in the contract, and it goes with ownership. If you rent your house, then you're not the owner, the landlord is the owner. So the landlord has that right, and if you want to change the color, you would have to get their permission. But if you are the owner, then you have that right and you don't need anybody's permission. So that's an example.
Thank you so much for the kind explanation. Professor, as you know, as I know, you have a special relationship with Korea, right?
Yeah.
You gave some lectures in Yonsei University for a month in 2014.
Yes, that's right.
Even though it's a little bit a broad question, maybe, but can you tell me your impression of Korean economy?
The Korean economy. Well, let me say, first of all, I really had a great time in Korea. It was a tremendous month. And people extremely nice to me, looked
Thank you.
after me very, very well. So I have a very fond memory of that time. And I made some good friends at Yonsei University, some among the faculty, but also particularly among the students who looked after me. I had a group of students who were in charge of looking after me, and they did an amazing job, and I became friends with them. I was in, I wasn't really studying the economy. I just had the same impressions that a tourist has, really. It seemed to be a very dynamic place and very efficient. I was extremely impressed with the efficiency, particularly, I mean, compared to the United States, you go into a store, a coffee shop, for example, and you get a cup of coffee and you pay with a credit card, and the transaction was done in a few seconds. Whereas in the US, typically at the time, I think it's changing a bit, but you would pay with cash. They wouldn't take a credit card for a small amount, and it just takes, getting the change and all this, it took minutes rather than seconds. I thought Korea was more efficient. And obviously in terms of technology, computers and so on, and iPhones and all the rest of it, they were very, very efficient. So that was something that struck me. I mean, the economy seemed to be doing well, but as I say, I was mainly, it was these superficial things that I noticed very much.
Thank you for your so much for your impression. This question is a little bit technical, actually. It is related to the last chapter of your book, maybe the chapter the 8, maybe.
Yes.
The voting right in a public company.
Right.
In Korea, whether to adopt a dual class voting system or not is a very controversial issue now.
Right.
For example, the Google in the United States can raise funds without the voting right issue because some founders have 10 times higher voting right,
Yes.
but Korean firms can't. Some scholars in
They
Korea,
cannot because
we have no dual class voting system.
But you have a lot of family control, don't you, of companies in Korea?
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
some scholars in Korea they argue that Korea's economy could be more prosperous with the American system like a dual class voting system.
Yeah.
I'm curious about your opinion about
Yes.
this.
Well, my opinion is the following. I mean, I, like many economists, believe that it's okay to let people come to their own contractual arrangements. So, of course, as a contract theorist, I particularly think a lot in terms of contracts. And basically, it's a sort of freedom of contract idea that if you and I want to write a particular kind of contract, and we both understand what we're getting into, then we should be allowed to do so, and the state should enforce that contract unless there are third parties who are affected negatively. Okay. Now, the same sort of idea applies here, because when a company goes public, say, I think we're talking about public companies, right? So when they go public, they issue shares which ordinary people buy, and when you buy a share, you are entering into a contract with a company. And by and large, I think that the company and you should be able to enter into any contract you and they like. And that would include the possibility that you would agree not to have votes or to have fewer votes. So if the company announces we're going to sell shares to the public, but they are going to have 1 vote per share, but meanwhile the founders of the company are going to have a second class of shares which have 10 votes or 100 votes per share. If that's made clear to everybody, then I think it's okay.
It's okay.
Because when I buy shares in that company, I know I am getting shares with fewer votes per share than the shares that some other people have. And I willingly enter that transaction. I have my eyes open. And that seems fine to me. If I don't like that idea, if I don't want to be a shareholder in a company where somebody else has many more votes per share than I do, well, then I don't have to buy the shares. That's my choice. And just to sort of build on that point, if the people who buy these shares think that they won't get as much profit from them because the company has a controlling shareholder who may push the company in directions which are in their interest rather than in the interest of the ordinary shareholders. If we think that, then we will pay less for the shares. That's another way of thinking about it. Because we're reluctant to buy them, because they don't have many votes, we will discount them. And so the founder of the company who sells these shares will find in a rational market that they should be going for less, which, by the way, might encourage the founder instead to go with a 1 share, 1 vote policy. So one of the reasons that traditionally perhaps people have not had dual class arrangements is because they realize that when they sell the shares, they won't make as much money from selling them because the public will be cautious. Okay, so this is all a way of saying that I don't see any reason why the state or the government should interfere with these arrangements. So this argument says dual class shares are okay and should be allowed. Now, things become more complicated later in the relationship. So this, by the way, is very much connected to the whole idea of incomplete contracts. So what we tend to see is that these companies, they issue shares with lower votes per share, and then later they might decide to issue some more shares, and let's say which will further dilute the voting interests of the public shareholders, while allowing the founders to maintain control. So there's just been a case like this involving Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg, I think, well, actually, he wanted to. I have to remember whether I can get it, see whether I can get this right. But basically, he had a controlling stake, but he wanted to sell a lot of the of his shares and still retain control. So this would be a change, some years after the company went public, and because he had control, he could do this. And the public shareholders complained on the grounds that this is not something that they'd agreed to in advance. So let me be a little more specific about this, and I have to apologize if I don't get the details exactly right, but I think it was something like this. Let's say Zuckerberg has control, but he also has a pretty large income stake in the company. So you could say that the ordinary shareholders think, well, he has control, but he has a big financial stake. So his actions will be in our interest as well as his, because he's interested in money since he has a big financial stake. Now he decides that he wants to give up a lot of that financial stake. I think it was some sort of charitable, some foundation, something like that. So his financial interest in the company would be reduced, but he still wanted to retain control. So now the public shareholders think to themselves, well, we're not so happy about this because this guy Zuckerberg, he's still going to have control, but now his financial interest will be much lower. So he may now take actions, use his control to take actions which are no longer in our interest. So they objected to this, and in fact, there was going to be a court case about it, and eventually Zuckerberg withdrew his proposal, and so. But this is the kind of problem that can arise later, and the reason it arises is because the initial contract with the shareholders, when you go public, is an incomplete contract. And so if someone has control, they can later change the terms of the contract. And then there's a question of whether they should be allowed to do that or they shouldn't be allowed to do that. And that can be very controversial. So I would say, this is a very long answer to your question, but I would say that I don't have any objection to dual class shares, at least initially, but I think one does have to worry a bit about how things evolve. And related to that, another argument that has been made, some people in this country think that dual class shares are okay, but that they should have an end date. In other words, they shouldn't be forever. That after a certain number of years, they should turn into ordinary shares with no extra votes. So that, and one of the reasons for this is to avoid the kind of situation we see with, so this is another thing that was in the news quite recently, Viacom. Viacom, the controller of Viacom was somebody called Sumner Redstone, who's a very famous guy, and this was a company with dual class. He had control, but unfortunately he developed some form of dementia or Alzheimer's, I'm not sure exactly what, but anyway, and then the whole question is, there was a struggle among family members, and again, I apologize to your readers if I get the details not entirely right, but roughly speaking, the controller was no longer mentally able to exercise control, and then there was a fight for who should have control, and it was all very messy. And people who look at that say, well, this is the problem with this thing, and this is why it would be a good idea, let's say, to have it controlled for 10, 20 years, and then the whole thing becomes a one share, one vote company. So maybe that's a good idea. I'm not sure about that. But anyway, I'm not against dual class as a matter of principle.
Okay, thank you for your kind answer. This may be the last question, Professor.
Yeah.
According to the newspaper, the United States newspaper,
Yeah.
one of the main economic policies of Trump administration is tax reform,
Yeah.
which is a sharp decrease in business tax rate in the highest bracket from 35% to 20%.
Yeah.
In contrast, the Korean government is trying to increase the corporate tax rate in the highest bracket,
Yeah.
the up to 25%, which is a quite opposite direction to the U.S.
Yeah.
Could you tell me your opinion on the business tax issue between the
Yeah.
two countries?
All right. Well, my opinion is basically the following. I'm not a big fan of corporate taxes. Because I think essentially it's double taxation. You tax. A corporation makes some money,
Yes.
some profit, and it gets taxed at the corporate level, and then they distribute it, perhaps as a dividend to shareholders, who then pay tax again.
Yes.
As part of their personal, it's part of their personal income, so they pay tax on that. So you tax twice, and I think many economists don't think that makes sense. So I actually would be in favor. I'm in favor of lower corporate taxes, but I don't think that means that we should reduce the overall level of taxation. So I would reduce the corporate tax rate, but raise the income tax rate correspondingly. And the Trump administration and Republicans generally are all in favor of lower taxes, as opposed to, or many of them, not all of them. I think some Republican economists would be more would agree, be closer to my position,
Okay.
which is let's simplify the tax code, and double taxation is an example of a complexity. Let's get rid of this sort of thing, make the whole thing simpler. But that doesn't mean that you reduce overall taxes. I, in fact, would be in favor of increasing taxes on the rich, because I think income inequality it has gotten much bigger. Everyone has noted that. Now it's generally accepted. It's striking, and there's no reason. Given that, why shouldn't we? If we want to change taxes, we should be increasing them on the rich and do a bit more income redistribution. But at the same time, as I say, you could reduce corporate taxes.
Okay. Professor Hart, thank you so much again for taking time for our Korean audience and for giving your valuable opinion. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much.
앞에서도 언급드렸다시피 이 영상을 10여 편 정도로 나눠서 함께 공부하는 영상으로 자세히 다뤄볼 예정입니다. 다음 주에 첫 편이 나갑니다. 다음 주에 뵙겠습니다. 감사합니다.